Welcome to another CEO Wisdom Pod. We have Margot Cairnes with us today. Margot is a global impact strategist. So, a long bio that I won't read fully today, but definitely a thought leader. She's an international speaker, business coach, in rapid change and strategic issue, World Economic Forum thought leader, an author, a visionary, a futurist. She's advising boards and CEOs of multinational company for over 30 years with proving results. We're going to discuss about these results today. But before we do, this podcast is brought to you by bookwritegpt.com. If you want to take your thought leadership that you've written on LinkedIn and convert that into a nice Kindle book, you can go to bookwritegpt.com. Margot, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to.
Well, firstly, my name's Margot. Like I say to people like Margot Robbie, no one ever seems to forget Margot Robbie. And what am I up to? Well, I was a founder and I started a strategic consulting firm, which went all around the world doing things like the mergers of BP and Mobil across Europe and BP and Amoco across the globe. People may not know BHP, but it's one of the biggest companies in Australia, and it merged with Billington, which is the biggest company in South Africa, and I was part of all of that. One year I was overseas 36 weeks out of 52, and I decided I'd buy a farm and live in Byron Bay instead of doing that, which is what I did. But I really regretted not using my skills. It was a real mourning that I went through, so I went back to work. And I'm having a wonderful time doing what I used to do, helping companies turn themselves around or do huge mergers or demergers. But my real love, Charles, is what it does for the people. So, I'm a psychologist, I'm a psychotherapist, I'm a group analyst, I'm a company director, trained company director, I've got an MBA, I'm a trained teacher, I'm a trained MBA, I've got a BA in education, I'm a trained hypnotherapist, and I'm a trained yoga teacher. So I put all of those things together and work with people. And what I see is people and companies come to life. So all that talent that was hiding in the company sometimes somehow shines. The company shines, people's mind clears, they make better decisions, and they go home and are happy. They're happy. I get thank yous from wives and children, and then people ask me to come and work with their wives and their children. These days, even a few husbands, which is nice. In the old days, it was all wives because I was working at the top end of the world, and back then there were only men there. And now we're seeing more and more women, and I'm really enjoying working with them.
Right. And what's number one problem do they come and see you for, normally speaking? Is there like one specific problem that you're very good at solving?
Change, any kind of change. I like to think that I work with what I call wicked problems, and wicked problems are large, complex changes full of unknowns. And that's what I'm an expert at. Anything to do with uncertainty, the more difficult the problem, the happier I am working with it. Yeah.
Right. Talking about change with AI, what have you seen in this new market? Do you feel as relevant as you were before? And how are you adapting yourself with this massive AI change that we're living through right now?
Well, I'm loving it because I live in Byron Bay, which means I'm not in a major centre, so I'm not going to all the events and meeting all the people, but I can certainly meet them online. And when I decided to go back to work, I had let most of my contacts go because I was more interested in the cows and the chickens and the grandchildren. And how do you get back? Well, the way you get back is you meet wonderful people like you, Charles, who do AI marketing, and they take you back to the world, and then the world gets to hear about you, and they go, well, hey, AI can't help me go home happier. AI can't help me think through these problems that are just they're just so complex, and they're so big, and they're so uncertain. AI can't help me do that. It can give me information, it can give me ideas, but it can't help me with the complexity. So for me, it's just an absolute blessing. Thank you, AI. Keep coming.
Right. And what are skills that humans can really thrive and can have a potential moat in this future vs AI? Is it intuition? Is it humor? Is it risk? Is it taking, going to the boundaries vs and not knowing AI?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question, Charles. Looking at it slightly differently, I'd say what humans can bring is humanity. AI is an algorithm. it's as good or as bad and as ethical or as unethical as the person that programmed the algorithm. So, humans have a huge role of stewardship with AI. How ethical are we going to be? What are those? What all the people that I know that are in AI, the experts tell me is that AI is a black box. Well, how are we going to deal with that black box if we don't know what's going in? If it teaches itself in a way we can't even get our head around, how are we as humans going to manage that? And, one of the things I did want to talk to you about today is I'm a great student of a guy called Robert Kagan, who I think he still is the professor of education at Harvard. And he talks about levels of adult brain development. And the majority of the population, about 63%, is at what we call the lower levels. And basically, they just want to make money. They just want to get on. They just want to survive. They don't really care what happens. They don't really think through the consequences of what they do because they're just in the moment getting on with what they're getting on with. However, 35% of the population care and they have enough sense of self to want to do something about it. How you get to be in that top 35% is you fail. You collapse. You do what I do. You go, this flying around the world is just way too much. I'm going to go and talk to the cows. You kind of drop out basically in some way. Your marriage fails, you get cancer, something happens, and you go, well, maybe there is more to life. Maybe, there is more to life than just making money and killing people. When I'm saying killing, I mean in the business sense, business is incredibly competitive. And then they go, well, maybe there's more to life than that. Maybe I'd like to explore that. Now, every company has 35% of these people. Right? 35% of every couple of these people. And do you know what they're doing, Charles? They're hiding. They're hiding because they're the minority. People think they're crazy and weird. Some companies, somehow these guys get to the top. Now, they're the men I have met and now some women heading these big global companies. How they got to the top, I just don't know. But once they're there, they're brilliant. So they don't just have to make money. They don't just have to appease the shareholders. They're actually out there looking at the environment. They're looking at the community. They're building community within their company. They're building community around where they live and with their family, and because they get bigger. So what happens is these people somehow you get bigger. Now, once you get big like that, Charles, you can actually solve these wicked problems because you can understand them. You can comprehend them, right? So what happens to this? What happens to the 60? Sorry, what happens to the 63% is they can't even see these wicked problems. What they do is they chunk it down because that's what I was taught at business school, right? I was taught at business school. You chunk it down and you solve each little bit. But actually, they're not little bits. It's a complex, interconnected, dynamic system. And you can't solve a complex, interconnected, dynamic system by breaking it into bits. In Australia, we have the thing with the cane toads, and we all know about it because I live further south, but the cane toads were way north, thousands of kilometres north, and I now have cane toads in my garden. But the cane toads was something that was brought up, was thought through to deal with vermin in the cane fields, right? But it was so successful that they've taken over. They're killing our natural fauna. That's a lovely example of somebody taking a wicked problem and turning it into a tame problem, solving the tame problem and creating a bigger problem. So when I'm very interested in geopolitics, so when I look at what is happening around the world right now, I see a whole lot of world leaders who are solving wicked problems as tame problems and creating much bigger problems. It's a really interesting time. Really interesting time. And a problem is when you look at particularly country leaders, a large percentage of them are at the bottom of that 63%.
Interesting. Yeah, that was directly my next question. So you're probably hinting to the tariffs, right? Like the tariffs is like a simple 0 to 1 solution that is way more complex than just shooting percentages and negotiating at the Trump table, right? That's one. But two, related to that, right? Do you feel that most CEOs eventually scale out of the money mindset and eventually care about the world? And is it just like a 1% that are very sort of psychopathic and will continue in the money line and will never be satisfied?
Well, it's not an either or. So the majority of people stay in that bottom 63%, right? And because that's where your competitors are, you can be there. I don't mean you, Charles, I mean a CEO. Yeah? However, if you go up these levels of adult brain development, and you can also do it not by a disaster. I mean, that's not normally what sparks it, is a disaster, because it makes people so uncomfortable they change. But you can also choose to go on a growth path and go up those levels of thinking. You make more money. So my clients have never, ever, ever got me to help them help the community or the environment or for them to be happier. Ever, never once, right? They have always come with me to make more money. And Charles, they make billions more money. So when you start thinking this way, it's not either or. It's and, right? Which for somebody at the lower levels is almost impossible to understand. So what happens is once I help somebody get up those levels, then how do you bring the people underneath them up those levels so that the company can come with you? Once you get a company operating, well, you can never get a whole company. Once you get the top of the company thinking that way at these higher levels of adult brain development, the company just explodes with success. It's the only way I can say it. It explodes with success. It explodes with care about the environment and the community, because it's not either or, it's and, because it's a system. So what we know about systems is you change one part of a system, you change that system plus every system to which that system is connected. So once you start thinking systemically, and the change doesn't have to be big, by the way. So once you start thinking systemically at these higher levels of adult brain development, I call them miracles because I can't think of another word to explain it. Everything changes for the better radically.
So you mean that win-win is the only way to get very rich? Like, haven't we seen like these big petroleum companies get incredibly rich and destroy the full world in their paths?
Absolutely. So what would happen is I would go in and say work with a division of BP, right? And they would stop doing that. But then it's a big company. Maybe one section is thinking at those higher levels. So when that person moves on, the company, that goes back. It goes back to where it was. It goes back. Because you have to actually get the maths. So that's why I started to work with boards. So I started working with divisions of companies, then I started working with the top teams, then I started to work with the boards. But it's such a long process. And, well, it doesn't have to be a long process. You can get the results really quickly, right? So one of the companies I went into, we put it into administration, and it owed $3.2 billion to 36 different lenders who didn't get on with each other. And then within, I think it was 5 years, we had created 2 global companies, each worth $6 billion, which dominated the world market from a totally failed company. But that was with a leader who was thinking at these higher levels, that put people around him who were prepared to be trained to go to those higher levels. We worked with the board so that they were thinking at the higher levels, and they solved a whole range, a raft of really unpleasant environmental problems on the way through, and social problems.
It seems to me that the leaders at the top nowadays, Trump, right, or even Elon are playing Machiavellian games, which is mostly like win-lose and master plans that are hidden under plain sight. Like, for example, acquiring Twitter, mentioning that they buy them for democracy, while in reality he used it to influence elections, and now is harvesting Twitter data for its AI. And if you read like the Elon communications with the OpenAI board, you can clearly see that he just wants AGI and world domination, doesn't give a fuck about like open sourcing it and creating a benevolent AI, right? So it seems to me that the most richest and powerful nowadays are not necessarily playing win-win games. They're telling the world that they are, right? Same for Trump. Oh, he wants to help the people, but in reality just wants to advance his own agenda. That's most of his mindset. So I'm not so sure that I believe the win-win theory of things there.
Okay, so I'm not talking about global. I'm not talking about working with world leaders. I'm talking about working with leaders of companies. Right? People have asked me, why don't I work in politics? And I've said, because 63% of the population, i.e. the voters, are at the lower levels of adult brain development. So who are they going to vote and support? They're going to support a leader at the lower levels of adult brain development. So you are 100% correct. And once people have that sort of absolute power corrupts absolutely, so you get to be incredibly wealthy, you get to be incredibly powerful, you'll do what you do. However, that doesn't mean that an individual company or a group of companies, and a lot of them are doing this, can't operate in a different way. I mean, if you want to create hell around you and you want to live in hell, go for it. A lot of people do that, and that's where they stay. But if you actually want to create the kind of, I mean, my clients would tell me things like, we'd rather sit down and have a discussion with our colleagues and go to a dinner party, because there's more authenticity here. There's more support. We feel more real. We feel more powerful here, right? If you want to create a culture where people actually can be human, where you can be human, and you make a lot more money, right? Because you're thinking at these higher levels of adult brain development, you can do it. Can a company do it within a democracy? Yeah, I think we'd be better off with a benevolent dictator.
Right. And what are the signs of this adult brain development that you're referring to? Is it like high EQ? Is it thinking of community instead of thinking of a man-child that wants an empire? Or
no, I have tests I put people through, and sometimes even those tests get it wrong. I remember one of my clients presented me with his top team. He was the new CEO, and he said, what should I do with these people? And I interviewed them, and I said, personally, I'd take them out the back and shoot them. And then a year later, I'm sitting interviewing them one by one, and these magnificent men, one by one, are coming in to see me, because inside of them were the seeds of that adult brain development. And what we'd done is we'd been through a process over a year, and those seeds had blossomed. And that company literally turned, I mean, first it hadn't made a profit for 10 years. It became the most successful division of a huge global company, and went through a major merger at the same time, which is unusual to do both those things together.
so nowadays, do people pay you as a coach? Is it like a monthly retainer? Do you sit on board? Do you advise? Like, how do you make your money?
No, people have asked me to sit on boards a lot, Charles, and I never will, because I'm a disruptor. You know, my aim is not to keep things the same and stable. My aim is to have radical support, radical success, radical change, and for the good. So if I'm sitting on boards, you know, I'm one of usually a lot of very staid people, and I'm coming up with ideas that probably know about wicked problems that they're probably not getting their head around, and it's not pleasant. I don't want to do that. What I do is I coach and then work with either the leader or the whole top team, or in some cases the whole company, of people that really want to make a difference in a way that they make a lot more money, have a lot more fun, and go home at the end of the day and, you know, able to put their arms around their loved ones who are glad to see them.
So monthly retainers, I would guess, like packages, weekly meetings, or something.
Well, that's what I'm starting. I'm doing because I'm really only. For years I hid. I mean, I didn't even have a website. I didn't want to do it. I'd made enough money. I was happy on the farm. And, you know, I've only really started to go back the last few years. So, and honestly, the money just pours in. So I haven't really thought about it, but I'm starting to think about monthly retainers. I'm starting to think about doing an online course, which is just a way of letting people know I'm here and that these ideas are here, because they're such wonderful ideas. And if you can get them out there and you can get people realizing there is another way, you know, you may be not able to change the whole of America, right? But you may be able to change your global industry.
Right. And you mentioned disruptor. How can you be an effective disruptor, right? Because it's sort of easy to be contrarian, to identify problem, but if you don't deliver them with like EQ, no one will follow you, no one will follow your plan. So how can you be an effective disruptor?
Well, I think you just answered it. You do it with a lot of EQ. So I'm a big believer in the 4 quadrants, which is a model that comes out of Ken Wilber. And he basically says, if you want real change, you have to work on 4 quadrants at the same time in the same direction. So what are the 4 quadrants? Well, there's the individual internally. So that's my levels of thinking, my psychological well-being, my EQ, my SQ. And I'm a big believer in SQ, by the way, it helps. As one of my clients said, if you don't have a spiritual belief, how do you cope with all this shit? They're going through a lot of shit in their company. I go, well, yeah, you got a point there, love. So there's SQ. There's internal. Then there's internal, external. So the internal individual. There's external individual, which is skills. You know, the things that we measure in business, the things that we talk about, the things that we actually think people are. We think people are a set of skills, but it's only one of the 4 quadrants. Then there's the next one is group internal. So that's culture. Now, that's once you can get a culture to change, it's exponential, Charles. It's exponential. Once the culture starts to change, what happens in terms of everything positive is exponentially good, right? Because that's the unconscious, right? So the internal and all the internal stuff, individual and group, is the unconscious. So what we know is that in any 1 second, the conscious mind processes 40 bits of information in 1 second. The unconscious mind processes 40 million bits of information unconsciously. So you start working with the levels of adult brain development, creating cultures. I call them yellow cultures, but we haven't got time to go into that. Once you start creating yellow cultures, you get an exponential increase in good. 40, you get 1 million times faster. And I've got to tell you, in a time of change like ours, in a time of exponential change and uncertainty like in our world, thinking 1 million times faster is good stuff. So then the external group, of course, is your stuff that we also measure in business. It's our systems and our processes and our written strategies right. So you've got to do all those 4 things simultaneously. And that's my work.
It sounds like rocket science.
Well, look, I've got to tell you, I tried to employ people to do this and I really couldn't find people.
Yeah, that's your special power. Just one last question.
Yeah.
I know that we're almost out of time here, but changing a culture seems really, really hard to me. Like changing humans and tell them to behave and think some way. Is it better to just chop off the bad apples and keep the right actors, or is that also very detrimental to business?
Both. You get rid of some people, and I've got to tell you, changing a culture is not hard when you know how to do it. The way that 75 to 85% of culture changes, any kind of change program, fail, and they fail because we do it in a very silly way that doesn't work.
So it's just about leaders leading, showing the way, and I guess the rest of the brains will follow the leaders. It starts at the top, and I guess about reputation, because these leaders are also easier to change than lower strata of the organizations as well.
The leaders are the hardest to change because they've got the most at risk. However, they've also got the most to gain. So it's very special. My work is very specialized. I'm not for everybody. I'm for people that really want to make a difference in terms of their success, in terms of their happiness, in terms of the world in which they grow up in. A lot of people actually care about their children and their grandchildren. So what kind of world are we creating? Are we creating a world we're proud to pass on to our children and our grandchildren? And even if we do it and it's turned around, I've seen that happen before. I've seen companies, become these world benchmarks. Several of my clients have become world benchmarks. Then somebody comes along who's at a lower level of brain development and they destroy it. Does that mean it's gone? No, because all those people that were influenced go out and influence other companies.
Right. Last question. What legacy do you want to leave in that world?
In the business world? I just like people to know it's possible.
In the world, period, like business, personal,
I've already
everything.
done that, sweetie. I've already done that. I've written 6 books. I've got 10 grandchildren. Look, I really hope I can get more of these ideas out. So more people like you I can talk to, more I can let people know it's possible, that you actually can have these amazing organizations that are fun and successful and way more successful than those horrible ones which are, you say, Machiavellian. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you, Margot. Where can people find out more about you?
So just my name there, Margot Cairnes. My website is margotcairnes.com. If you go on LinkedIn and look up Margot Cairnes, you'll find out all about me there. So, yeah, I am my brand.
So that was Margot Cairnes.